She demanded to see his ID until she realized she was accusing a war hero of trespassing in his own home. It was a scorching summer afternoon at the Oak Ridge community, the kind of day where the air hangs heavy and the only relief comes from the shimmer of cool water. Admiral Marcus Johnson had just returned from a 6-month deployment overseas. After decades of distinguished service in the Navy SEALs, rising to the rank of Rear Admiral, he had recently moved into this upscale neighborhood, seeking peace and quiet in his rare moments away from Pentagon duties. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Marcus cut through the crystal blue community pool with powerful, methodical strokes. Swimming had always been his meditation. The rhythmic movement, the controlled breathing, the silence beneath the surface. 20 laps in, he paused at the pool's edge to catch his breath. The day was perfect. Families laughed together, children splashed in the shallow end, and the smell of barbecue wafted from nearby grills. As Marcus pulled himself up to sit on the edge of the pool, he noticed a woman marching purposefully toward him. Karen Whitfield, the self-appointed neighborhood watch captain who had moved in just 3 months ago, clutched her designer purse tightly as she approached. Behind her trailed her embarrassed-looking teenage son, Tyler. "Excuse me," Karen said, loudly, her voice cutting through the ambient pool noise. "I don't know how you got in here, but this pool is for residents only." Marcus blinked water from his eyes, momentarily confused. "I am a resident," he replied calmly. "I moved into 476 Highland Drive back in January." Karen's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "I know everyone in this community, and I've never seen you before. Do you have your resident key card?" "It's in my bag over there." Marcus gestured toward a navy blue duffel with a military insignia partially visible. "I'm Admiral Marcus Johnson. I've been deployed for the past 6 months." "Right," Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "And I'm the Queen of England. Look, I don't want any trouble, but you need to leave before I call security." People around the pool had begun to notice the confrontation. Some pretended not to listen while others openly stared. Marcus remained composed, a skill honed through years of high-pressure situations far more dangerous than this. "Ma'am, there seems to be a misunderstanding. I live at 476 Highland Drive. I'm an admiral with the United States Navy," Marcus explained, his voice remaining level. "I've been overseas, which is why you haven't seen me around." Karen's face flushed with anger. "Do you really expect me to believe that? This is an exclusive community. Houses here cost over $1 million. Her son, Tyler, looked mortified. "Mom, maybe we should—" "Not now, Tyler," she snapped, before turning back to Marcus. "I'm the head of the Homeowners Association committee, and I know exactly who lives in each house. 476 is owned by an Admiral Johnson, not—" Her eyes swept over Marcus dismissively. Marcus stood up, water cascading off his athletic frame. The faded scar on his shoulder, a remnant from a classified operation in his SEAL days, caught the sunlight. "I am Admiral Johnson," he said, his patience beginning to wear thin, but his voice remaining controlled. "Sure you are," Karen laughed derisively. "And I suppose you're going to tell me you flew fighter jets and commanded warships too? Security in this neighborhood has really gone downhill if they're letting random people wander in claiming to be military officers." Nearby, an older man had been listening intently. Frank Peterson, a retired Marine Corps colonel who lived 3 doors down from Marcus, approached the scene with a frown creasing his weathered face. "Karen, that's enough," Frank interrupted firmly. "This man is exactly who he says he is. Admiral. Johnson moved in earlier this year before deploying again." Karen whirled around, startled by Frank's intervention. "Frank, you can't be serious. This man claims he's—" "Rear Admiral Marcus Johnson," Frank finished for her. "Distinguished Navy, SEAL, recipient of the Navy Cross, current Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command. And yes, he absolutely lives at 476. Karen's mouth opened and closed several times, no words emerging. Tyler, her son, stepped forward with a look of recognition dawning on his face. "Wait, are you the Admiral Johnson who led the hostage rescue in Somalia? We studied that operation in my military history class at school." Marcus nodded slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "That was a team effort. Many brave men and women made that mission successful." Frank turned to Karen, whose face had drained of color. "Admiral Johnson has done more for this country than you could possibly imagine, most of which is classified and you'll never hear about. He's also donated the entire East Wing of the Veterans Hospital downtown." Karen's eyes widened as the reality of her mistake began to sink in. Several neighbors had gathered now, many nodding in recognition of Marcus. Mrs. Patel from across the street approached with a plate of cookies, welcoming Marcus home from deployment. The Henderson family's teenagers asked for pictures. The commotion around the pool had gradually subsided, like ripples fading after a stone breaks the water's surface. Admiral Marcus Johnson found himself at the center of an impromptu welcome home gathering, a stark contrast to the hostile confrontation of just an hour before. Neighbors who had witnessed Karen's accusatory tirade now approached with embarrassed smiles and extended hands, each eager to distance themselves from her behavior while establishing their own connection to the distinguished military officer. In their midst, Marcus accepted their greetings with the gracious patience that had served him well through decades of military diplomacy. Despite his preference for privacy, he understood the social dynamics at play. These were to be his neighbors during his increasingly rare periods at home, and building community was never a wasted effort. Besides, after months of high stakes, operations, and the isolation of command, there was something refreshingly normal about discussing lawn care techniques and local restaurant recommendations. Mrs. Patel, a retired mathematics professor from the house across the street, had been the first to approach after Frank's intervention. Her plate of homemade cardamom cookies came with a gentle smile and quiet words of welcome that required no response. Now she sat in a nearby lounge chair, occasionally adding thoughtful comments to the conversation while keeping a watchful eye on her grandchildren in the shallow end. "We're having a neighborhood block party next month," offered Michael Chen, who lived 2 doors down from Marcus. "Nothing fancy, just barbecue and potluck sides. Would be great if you could make it, Admiral. Whenever you're not saving the world, that is." His attempt at humor carried genuine warmth. "I'll check my calendar," Marcus replied, privately thinking that an afternoon of civilian small talk might be more challenging than his last covert operation. Still, he appreciated the gesture. "And please call me Marcus. Admiral is for official functions and subordinates." Across the pool deck, Karen Whitfield maintained her self-imposed exile on a distant lounge chair. Her rigid posture and the mechanical way she scrolled through her phone betrayed her acute awareness of her social blunder. Occasionally, her eyes would dart up to observe the gathering around Marcus before quickly returning to her screen. The neighborhood's subtle but definitive shift in allegiance had not gone unnoticed by her. Marcus occasionally glanced in her direction, not out of malice but professional habit. In his line of work, maintaining awareness of potential threats, even social ones, was second nature. He had encountered people like Karen throughout his career, individuals whose worldview was so narrowly constructed that anything outside their expectations became a threat to be eliminated. As a black man who had risen to the highest echelons of military command, he had become adept at navigating such encounters with a composure that often surprised those who sought to diminish him. The Henderson family's teenage daughters had initially approached for selfies, something Marcus politely declined, citing security concerns, but stayed to hear abbreviated versions of his non-classified experiences. Jessica Henderson, the elder daughter at 17, was particularly interested in his underwater demolition training. "So you had to hold your breath for how long?" she asked, wide-eyed. "The training pushes your limits," Marcus explained, carefully, omitting the more harrowing details of SEAL qualification. But it's more about learning to stay calm under pressure than actual breath-holding records. That's sort of like competitive swimming. Jessica nodded thoughtfully. When you panic, you lose. Exactly, Marcus agreed, impressed by her insight. Control your mind, and your body follows. The conversation flowed easily, with other neighbors joining and departing as the afternoon progressed. Marcus found himself explaining the basics of naval hierarchy to a curious 8-year-old boy, discussing veterans' healthcare initiatives with a retired nurse, and exchanging book recommendations with Frank's wife, Eleanor, who taught American literature at the local community college. Throughout the impromptu gathering, Marcus noticed Tyler, Karen's son, hovering at the periphery. The teenager's body language suggested an internal struggle between genuine interest in the military discussions and loyalty to his mother. Marcus recognized the look. He'd seen it in young recruits torn between their training and their instincts in high-pressure situations. He deliberately kept his posture open and occasionally made eye contact with Tyler, offering silent permission to approach when ready. After nearly an hour of this social navigation, Marcus felt a familiar weariness settling into his bones. The kind that came not from physical exertion but from the constant calibration required when existing in spaces where his identity was perpetually under scrutiny. Even here, in a neighborhood where he owned property worth well over 7 figures, his right to occupy space had been challenged. The water of the pool beckoned, promising the mindless physical release of swimming laps. The crowd around him had thinned somewhat when he noticed Tyler finally breaking away from his distant observation post. The teenager approached with measured steps, waiting until Marcus had finished his conversation with the Hendersons before speaking. "Sir, I just wanted to apologize for what happened earlier," Tyler said, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to where his mother sat. "My mom sometimes—" He trailed off, searching for words that would explain without betraying. Marcus studied the young man. 16, maybe 17, with the gangly build of someone still growing into his height. His eyes held a mixture of embarrassment and determination that Marcus found familiar, the look of someone forced to reckon with uncomfortable truths about a parent. He'd seen that same expression in his own mirror decades ago. "It's all right, son," Marcus replied kindly, recognizing the courage it took for Tyler to approach him. "We all make assumptions sometimes. The important thing is what we learn from those moments." Tyler nodded gratefully, seeming to stand a little straighter, with the burden of proxy guilt somewhat lightened. "I'm actually thinking about applying to the Naval Academy after graduation," he ventured. "I know it's hard to get in, but it takes dedication and character," Marcus finished for him, genuinely impressed by the ambition. "Those are qualities you build over time with every choice you make." He glanced meaningfully in Karen's direction before returning his attention to Tyler. "Stop by my place sometime if you want to talk about it. I'd be happy to give you some pointers." "Really?" Tyler's face brightened with unexpected hope. "That would be amazing." "Thank you, sir." "Marcus," he corrected gently. "Or Admiral Johnson." "In formal settings, but never sir when we're neighbors discussing your future." Tyler smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "Thank you, Marcus. I'll definitely take you up on that." As the teenager returned to his mother's side, Marcus noticed Karen's posture stiffen. Even from across the pool deck, he could read the tension in her shoulders and the tight grip she maintained on her designer handbag. The conversation with her son appeared one-sided, with Karen's lips moving rapidly while Tyler's responses were minimal. Marcus turned away, allowing them their privacy, while silently hoping that the boy's evident character would withstand whatever narrative his mother was constructing. The afternoon sun had begun its gradual descent, casting longer shadows across the pool area. Families with young children had mostly departed, and the ambient noise level had decreased accordingly. Marcus considered returning to his laps when he noticed Karen gathering her belongings. For a moment, he thought she might leave without acknowledgement, but something, perhaps the watchful eyes of neighbors or her own sense of social preservation, seemed to change her mind. With visible reluctance, Karen approached, her path taking her near Marcus's chair. Her expression remained carefully composed, a social mask firmly in place, but her eyes couldn't quite meet his. She paused, clutching her bag like a shield. "Admiral," she said stiffly, her voice lacking its earlier accusatory confidence. "I may have been hasty in my assumptions earlier." The words fell short of an actual apology, but Marcus recognized the effort it cost her to offer even this much. Years of command had taught him to recognize when to press an advantage and when restraint would yield better long-term results. "You know, Mrs. Whitfield," he said thoughtfully, "in my line of work, assumptions can be deadly. Taking a moment to listen and understand can save lives, or at the very least, prevent unnecessary conflict." Something flickered across Karen's face, perhaps recognition, perhaps resentment at being lectured, however gently. She nodded curtly without further comment and continued toward the gate, her stride purposeful. Tyler followed, turning briefly to offer a small wave that Marcus returned with an encouraging nod. As the Whitfields disappeared through the pool gate, Frank settled into the chair beside Marcus with a weary sigh. The retired Marine colonel stretched, his legs wincing slightly at the stiffness in his right knee, a souvenir from a helicopter hard landing decades ago. "Well, that should make the next HOA meeting interesting," Frank remarked dryly. Marcus chuckled, feeling the tension of the afternoon finally beginning to dissipate. "I've faced enemy combatants in hostile territory. I think I can handle a homeowners association." "Don't be so sure," Frank replied with a wry smile that creased the weathered corners of his eyes. "At least in combat, you know who your enemies are." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two military men who understood the value of quiet after chaos. Around them, the pool area had largely emptied, with only a few determined swimmers remaining. "She's not a bad person, you know," Frank finally said, nodding toward the gate where Karen had exited. "Just limited. Grew up in a bubble and never bothered to look beyond it." "I've met many Karens throughout my career," Marcus replied, his tone neutral. "Some learn and grow. Others double down on their worldview because admitting they're wrong would require rebuilding their entire understanding of reality." "And which do you think she'll be?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Hard to say, but her son shows promise. Sometimes the next generation is where the real change happens." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Speaking of the next generation, that boy's interest in the academy seemed genuine. Think he has what it takes? Determination, integrity, the courage to stand apart when necessary. He showed all three today," Marcus observed. "The rest can be taught." As the sun continued its descent, casting the pool in golden afternoon light, the remaining neighbors gradually dispersed. Marcus exchanged contact information with several, including Frank and Eleanor, who insisted he join them for dinner later that week. Eventually, only Marcus remained, contemplating the now quiet pool. Tomorrow would bring a return to Pentagon briefings, classified operations planning, and the weight of decisions that affected national security. But tonight, he would swim in peaceful solitude, reclaiming the space that had momentarily been contested. As he lowered himself into the water, Marcus reflected that throughout his distinguished career, he had fought for many things: his country, his teammates, strategic objectives, but perhaps most consistently he had fought for the right to exist without explanation or apology in spaces where others questioned his presence. With powerful strokes, he cut through the water, each lap a silent affirmation of belonging. The battle today had been small compared to others he had faced, but its significance wasn't lost on him. In neighborhoods like this across America, such quiet confrontations happened daily, usually without witnesses or validation. Today's small victory wouldn't change the world, but perhaps it would change one teenager's perspective. And that was enough reason to keep swimming forward.